What scientific discovery would you like mankind to achieve in your lifetime? Story 1: Immortality. The wish that sounds greedy, until you think about who you'd lose otherwise. Immortality is the discovery everyone wants and almost nobody can articulate clearly. Because the version people actually want isn't eternal life in a failing body. It's the elimination of involuntary death from aging and disease while keeping the option to choose otherwise. That distinction matters enormously, and the research closest to delivering it is the Hallmarks of Aging framework, which identifies roughly 9 or 10 distinct biological mechanisms driving age-related decline: cellular senescence, telomere attrition, mitochondrial dysfunction, stem cell exhaustion, and several others working in concert rather than any single aging switch. The reason this feels achievable rather than purely fantastical is that each of these mechanisms is independently addressable with current or near-term technology. Senolytic drugs that selectively clear senescent cells, the zombie cells that stop dividing but refuse to die, instead pumping out inflammatory signals that damage surrounding tissue, have already shown effects in animal models, extending healthy lifespan measurably. Partial cellular reprogramming, inspired partly by Nobel Prize-winning research into induced pluripotent stem cells, has demonstrated the ability to reverse certain age-related cellular markers in mice without erasing the cell's identity entirely. What achieving immortality in your lifetime most realistically looks like isn't waking up one day unable to die. It's a series of incremental therapies, each adding healthy years rather than just years, that compound over a human lifetime in a way that effectively outruns the clock, sometimes called longevity escape velocity. If therapies are advancing fast enough that each decade of research buys you more than a decade of additional healthy life expectancy, the finish line moves further away faster than you're approaching it. Whether anyone alive today crosses that threshold is genuinely uncertain, but the biological mechanisms are no longer mysterious. They're a checklist, and checklists get worked through. Story 2: Fusion power plants. The wish that's closer than the joke about it suggests wanting practical fusion power plants in your lifetime used to be a slightly bittersweet wish, because fusion has been 20 years away for roughly 70 years, and everyone who works in or near the field has internalized the joke at this point. What's changed recently is that the joke is starting to feel genuinely outdated rather than perpetually accurate. The physics has been understood since the 1950s. Fuse light atomic nuclei together, release energy, no carbon emissions, fuel sourced from seawater, essentially limitless. The barrier has always been engineering, containing plasma at temperatures exceeding 100 million degrees Celsius long enough and densely enough to produce more energy than the containment system consumes. The National Ignition Facility crossed a genuine threshold in December 2022, achieving fusion ignition, more energy out of the fuel than laser energy put in, and has since repeated and improved on the result. What's actually accelerating things is the entry of private capital, with startup urgency replacing the multi-decade bureaucratic timelines of government fusion research. Commonwealth Fusion Systems is targeting net energy gain from a compact tokamak using newly available high-temperature superconducting magnets. Helion Energy has a signed power purchase agreement with Microsoft for fusion electricity by 2028, a commercial contract with a delivery date, which is a different category of commitment than a research roadmap. A working fusion power plant within a single human lifetime is no longer the optimistic fringe position it was a decade ago. It's becoming the position you have to argue against rather than for. The energy problem that has shaped geopolitics, climate policy, and economic development for the entire industrial era might actually get solved, not by magic, but by enough engineers finally getting the magnets right. Story 3: Cures for cancer and Alzheimer's. The two diseases research is finally attacking from the right angle, wanting cures for cancer. And Alzheimer's isn't an original wish, but it's worth noting how much the actual scientific approach to both has shifted in ways that make the wish feel less like wishful thinking and more like a realistic medium-term target. Cancer treatment for decades meant poisoning rapidly dividing cells and hoping the cancer died faster than the patient. The shift toward immunotherapy, engineering the patient's own immune system to recognize and destroy cancer cells specifically, represents a fundamentally different strategy. CAR T-cell therapy has produced durable remissions in blood cancers that were previously considered untreatable. mRNA cancer vaccines, using the same platform technology that produced COVID vaccines at record speed, are in trials for pancreatic cancer and melanoma, training the immune system to recognize the specific mutations present in an individual patient's tumor. This is personalized medicine at a level that simply didn't exist a decade ago. Alzheimer's research spent 30 years chasing the amyloid hypothesis with a discouraging track record of drugs that cleared amyloid plaques without meaningfully slowing cognitive decline. The field has since broadened its targets to include tau protein tangles, neuroinflammation, and vascular contributions to cognitive decline, recognizing that Alzheimer's is probably not one disease with one cause, but a final common pathway reached by several different routes. Lecanemab and donanemab, both now approved, show modest but real slowing of decline, the first genuine, if incomplete, victories the field has had. Neither disease is solved, but both fields have stopped pretending there's one silver bullet and started building toward combination approaches that mirror how cardiovascular disease eventually became manageable, not one cure, but enough partial victories stacked together that the disease stops being a death sentence. Story 4, What's in the Depths of the Ocean? The frontier we've explored less than the moon. This is one of those wishes that sounds modest compared to warp drives and immortality, but it might actually be the most achievable and most consequential entry on this entire list, because the gap in our knowledge is genuinely staggering. Humans have mapped the surface of the moon, Mars, and Venus in more detail than we've mapped our own ocean floor. As of recent surveys, only around 25% of the seafloor has been mapped to modern resolution standards. The rest remains effectively unexplored at any meaningful detail. The deep ocean, below about 200 meters, where sunlight no longer penetrates, constitutes more than 90% of the space available for life on Earth, and we've directly observed a vanishingly small fraction of it. Every deep-sea expedition that reaches genuinely unexplored territory discovers new species, sometimes at a rate that suggests the catalog of undiscovered deep-sea life could run into the millions. The deepest point, the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench, at nearly 11,000 meters, has been visited by fewer people than have walked on the moon. What makes this wish achievable rather than aspirational is that the technology to do it largely already exists and is improving rapidly. Autonomous underwater vehicles, improved sonar mapping, deep-sea submersibles rated for full ocean depth, and AI-assisted species identification from video footage are all converging to make comprehensive deep ocean exploration a realistic near-term project rather than a permanent frontier. What's missing isn't capability, it's prioritization and funding. In a world where space exploration captures imagination and budget in a way ocean exploration consistently doesn't, despite the ocean floor being arguably the larger and more accessible unknown. Story 5. Life on Mars. The discovery that would change every textbook simultaneously finding evidence of life on Mars, even microbial, even long extinct, would be one of the single most consequential scientific discoveries in human history, because it would answer, definitively, whether life is a universal feature of planets with the right conditions or an extraordinarily rare cosmic accident that happened once, here, and possibly nowhere else. The scientific case for taking this seriously isn't speculative optimism. Mars had liquid water on its surface for an extended period in its early history, with evidence including dried river deltas, lake bed sediments, and mineral deposits that only form in the presence of water observed by orbiters and rovers. NASA's Perseverance rover is currently collecting samples specifically selected from an ancient river delta in Jezero Crater, chosen because it represents exactly the kind of environment where microbial life, if it existed, would most plausibly have left detectable traces. And those samples are slated for eventual return to Earth, where laboratory analysis far more sensitive than anything deployable on Mars can examine them properly. Subsurface Mars is also a live area of interest, since liquid water may persist beneath the surface in places shielded from the harsh radiation and thin atmosphere that make the surface hostile to life as we understand it. Some methane detections in the Martian atmosphere remain unexplained and could, speculatively, relate to biological activity, though geological explanations remain equally plausible and haven't been ruled out. If we found it, even just confirmed microbial fossils, even just a single confirmed biosignature, every assumption about the rarity of life in the universe would need to be revisited. The Fermi paradox, the Drake equation, the entire framework for thinking about how common intelligence might be among the stars would shift overnight from theoretical to evidentiary. Story 6, the singularity, the discovery that would make every other discovery faster. Wanting the technological singularity within your lifetime is, in a sense, wanting every other wish on this list simultaneously. Because the core idea is that once artificial intelligence becomes capable of improving its own intelligence faster than humans can improve it, progress in every other field, medicine, physics, material science, energy, accelerates beyond what unaided human researchers could achieve on any comparable timescale. The concept, developed substantially by mathematician I.J. Good in 1965 and popularized later by figures including Ray Kurzweil and Werner Vinge, rests on a specific mechanism. An AI system capable of AI research could design improvements to itself, producing a slightly smarter system, which could then design even better improvements faster than the previous version could, in a feedback loop whose growth curve becomes difficult to predict or control. Using ordinary intuitions about technological progress, the honest current state of AI research is that we don't have a system capable of this kind of recursive self-improvement yet, and serious researchers disagree substantially about how close we actually are, with estimates ranging from a handful of years to many decades, and a meaningful contingent arguing it may not be achievable in the form originally envisioned at all. Large language models have demonstrated startling and unanticipated capability jumps as they scale, which has shifted many researchers' estimates of relevant timelines considerably closer than they expected a decade ago. What makes this wish distinct from the others on this list is the genuine uncertainty about whether it would be unambiguously good. The same researchers most excited about the potential are frequently the same ones most vocal about the safety and alignment challenges involved in making sure a vastly more capable intelligence remains beneficial to the humans who created it. Wanting the singularity means wanting the upside, while hoping someone solves the much harder problem of avoiding the downside first. Story 7. Humans living on the moon. The unrealistic wish that's actually already funded, calling permanent human habitation on the moon unrealistic undersells how much actual, funded, scheduled work is already underway toward exactly this goal. NASA's Artemis program, which successfully completed its uncrewed Artemis 1 test flight in 2022, is explicitly designed not as a one-off flags and footprints mission like Apollo, but as the foundation for a sustained, long-term human presence, including the planned Gateway space station in lunar orbit and surface infrastructure, intended to support extended astronaut stays rather than brief visits. The specific target driving much of the urgency is the moon's south pole, where permanently shadowed craters are now confirmed through orbital data and the Indian Chandrayaan-3 mission's successful landing in that exact region to contain significant water ice deposits. Water ice means drinking water, breathable oxygen through electrolysis, and potentially rocket fuel components, the resources required to make a lunar base genuinely self-sustaining rather than entirely dependent on resupply missions from Earth, which is the single biggest cost and risk factor in any long-duration off-world settlement. China's lunar program, running in parallel and sometimes explicit competition with Artemis, has similarly stated ambitions for a permanent research base near the lunar South Pole within a similar multi-decade timeframe, in partnership with Russia's space agency. The technical and financial challenges remain genuinely enormous. Radiation shielding, the extreme temperature swings of the lunar day-night cycle, psychological effects of long-duration isolation, and the sheer cost of soft landing the necessary infrastructure all need solving at a scale beyond anything achieved on the International Space Station. But unrealistic is the wrong word for something with active funding, hardware in production, and a stated multi-agency timeline. Difficult and expensive, certainly, but the plans exist and the first steps have already been taken. Story 8: Human-Machine Integration. The wish that's already quietly underway. Human-machine integration sounds like a distant science fiction concept until you realize it already exists in working, FDA-approved form, just not yet at the level of direct cognitive interface that captures the popular imagination. Cochlear implants restore hearing by converting sound directly into electrical signals that stimulate the auditory nerve, bypassing damaged portions of the ear entirely. A genuine machine-to-nervous system interface that hundreds of thousands of people use every day without anyone calling it cyborg technology. The frontier that's actually advancing rapidly is direct brain-computer interface. Neuralink's implants have allowed paralyzed patients to control computer cursors and play video games using thought alone, building on foundational research that DARPA and academic labs had been developing for over a decade prior. Synchron, a competing company, has developed an implant that doesn't require open brain surgery at all. It's threaded through blood vessels, reducing the risk profile considerably while achieving comparable signal quality. The trajectory researchers in the field describe involves progressively higher bandwidth and progressively less invasive methods, moving from restoring lost function in paralyzed or sensory-impaired patients toward eventually enhancing baseline human cognitive and sensory capability in healthy people. Direct access to information without a screen, enhanced memory, possibly even some form of direct brain-to-brain communication, though that last possibility remains genuinely speculative and far beyond current demonstrated capability. What makes this wish feel achievable rather than fantastical is that the foundational technology, reading and writing neural signals reliably, already works at a basic level in real patients today. The remaining work is overwhelmingly about bandwidth, safety, and reducing invasiveness, rather than proving the fundamental concept is possible. The concept is proven. We're refining it now. Story 9: Space travel. The wish that's quietly becoming an industry rather than a government program wanting space travel within your lifetime might be the wish on this list closest to simply asking for more of what's already happening. Because the past 2 decades have transformed spaceflight from an exclusively government-funded, extraordinarily rare undertaking into something approaching a genuine commercial industry, with multiple competing companies, falling costs, and increasing flight frequency. SpaceX's reusable Falcon 9 rocket has reduced the cost of reaching orbit by an order of magnitude compared to the expendable rockets that preceded it, and the company's Starship program, designed for full and rapid reusability at a scale far larger than any operational rocket, is explicitly aimed at reducing launch costs further still, with the long-term goal of making Mars colonization economically conceivable rather than merely scientifically interesting. Commercial crewed spaceflight has moved from non-existent to routine within a remarkably short window. Crew Dragon has flown numerous operational missions to the International Space Station. Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic have both flown paying customers on suborbital flights. Private astronaut missions, entire crews of non-government astronauts flying complete orbital missions, have already occurred multiple times. What's actually limiting how much space travel happens within your lifetime isn't primarily a technology gap anymore. The core engineering challenges of reaching orbit reliably are largely solved. What remains are cost reduction, safety margin improvement, and the development of destinations and purposes beyond the International Space Station. Commercial space stations, lunar tourism, eventually Mars missions that justify the continued investment required to keep driving costs down further. The honest assessment is that meaningful space tourism for people who aren't extremely wealthy and genuine interplanetary travel for ordinary people remain decades rather than years away. But the trajectory from government monopoly to competitive commercial industry has already happened, faster than most predictions from 20 years ago anticipated. Story 10. Anti-gravity and magnetic propulsion. The wish physics hasn't fully closed the door on anti-gravity, occupies an unusual position in physics. It's not supported by any confirmed mechanism in our current understanding of gravity, but it's also not definitively ruled out in the way that, say, perpetual motion machines are ruled out by thermodynamics. General relativity describes gravity as the curvature of space-time caused by mass and energy, and nothing in that framework offers an obvious mechanism for actively repelling or shielding against it, the way electromagnetic fields can be shielded. What keeps the question alive scientifically, rather than purely in the realm of speculation, is the genuine theoretical possibility of negative mass or exotic matter with negative energy density, which would, according to the equations, produce repulsive rather than attractive gravitational effects. Nobody has confirmed such matter exists in usable form, and the Casimir effect, a real, measurable quantum phenomenon involving negative energy density between extremely close parallel plates, produces forces far too minuscule to have any practical propulsion application. But it does demonstrate that negative energy density is at least physically possible in principle, not purely fictional. Magnetic propulsion is on considerably firmer footing and is already a real, demonstrated technology in specific applications. Maglev trains use magnetic levitation and propulsion to eliminate the friction of wheels on rails, achieving speeds well beyond what conventional rail can manage. Electromagnetic propulsion concepts for spacecraft, including various ion drive and plasma propulsion systems already flown on operational missions, use electromagnetic principles to accelerate charged particles for thrust, not anti-gravity, but a genuinely different propulsion paradigm from chemical rockets. True anti-gravity, in the sense of actively negating or reversing gravitational attraction at will, remains firmly theoretical and may simply not be physically achievable given how gravity actually works. But the boundary between definitely impossible and we don't yet have the physics hasn't fully closed, which is exactly the kind of gap that occasionally produces genuine surprises. Story 11. All-purpose domestic robots. The wish that's closer than the lack of them suggests wanting a genuine all-purpose domestic robot, something that can cook, clean, do laundry, and handle the variety of unstructured physical tasks an ordinary home requires. Sounds modest compared to warp drives, but it's actually one of the harder unsolved robotics problems. Precisely because homes are unstructured, unpredictable environments full of objects that weren't designed with robotic manipulation in mind. Industrial robots have been transformative for decades, but they succeed specifically because factory environments are controlled and repetitive. The same part arrives in the same position every time, and the robot performs the same motion repeatedly. A home is the opposite. Every dish is positioned differently. Every load of laundry contains different garments tangled in different ways. Every room has furniture and clutter arranged unpredictably. This is precisely the kind of problem that has resisted robotics for decades despite massive investment. What's changing the trajectory is the same foundation model approach that produced large language models, now being applied to robotic manipulation, systems trained on enormous, diverse datasets of physical interaction that allow generalization to novel objects and situations, rather than requiring task-specific programming for every individual scenario. Companies including Figure AI, 1X Technologies, and several others have demonstrated humanoid robots performing increasingly complex, varied manipulation tasks in real environments, rather than controlled lab demonstrations alone. The honest assessment is that a robot capable of handling the full, genuinely unstructured variety of domestic tasks at a level of reliability people would trust unsupervised in their own homes is probably still a decade or more away from broad commercial availability, even though the individual component capabilities, locomotion, object recognition, dexterous manipulation, are each independently advancing rapidly. The pieces are coming together faster than the public conversation about robotics has caught up with. The all-purpose home robot isn't science fiction anymore. It's an integration problem with a visible, if not immediate, finish line. Story 12: Stem cell tooth replacement. The specific, achievable wish that deserves more attention. This is a wonderfully specific wish compared to most of the others on this list. And it's also genuinely one of the more achievable ones on a relatively near-term timescale, because the underlying biological mechanism has already been demonstrated in animal models with results that translate plausibly to humans. Humans, unlike sharks and certain reptiles, grow exactly 2 sets of teeth across our entire lifespan: the deciduous baby teeth and the permanent adult set, with no natural mechanism for regrowing teeth lost to decay, injury, or disease afterward. Research out of Kyoto University has identified a protein called USAG1 that actively suppresses tooth growth in mammals, and researchers successfully used a monoclonal antibody to inhibit USAG1 in mice with congenital tooth deficiencies, triggering the growth of additional teeth beyond what the animals would naturally produce. The research has since been extended to ferrets, whose dental structure and growth patterns more closely resemble human teeth than mice do, with similarly promising results. The proposed mechanism doesn't involve growing entirely new teeth from nothing in a way that would require complex tissue engineering. It works by reactivating dormant tooth bud cells that exist in mammalian jaws but normally never develop into actual teeth beyond the initial 2 generations. This is a meaningfully easier biological problem than growing a tooth from stem cells in a lab and then surgically implanting it, which has also been explored as a parallel research direction with its own promising but more technically complex results. Human clinical trials specifically targeting this USAG1 pathway are anticipated within the next several years, with broader therapeutic availability potentially following within a decade if the trials proceed as the animal research suggests. For the roughly 1% of people born with congenital tooth deficiencies, and eventually for anyone who has lost teeth to decay or injury, this represents one of the more concretely achievable medical wishes on this entire list. Story 13: One unified global AI supercomputer. The wish that reveals why it'll never happen the way you imagine. The wish for humanity to come together and build one unanimous AI supercomputer containing all human knowledge is genuinely beautiful in its idealism. And it's worth examining exactly why the technical pieces of this already partially exist while the humanity comes together. Part remains the real obstacle that contains all our knowledge component is, in a real sense, already substantially underway through large language models trained on enormous corpora of human text, code, and increasingly multimodal data, including images, audio, and video. These systems don't contain knowledge the way a library contains books. They contain a compressed, statistical representation of patterns across that knowledge, but functionally, asking a modern frontier AI model a question already retrieves and synthesizes information drawn from an enormous fraction of recorded human knowledge, in a way that would have sounded like exactly this wish only 15 years ago. What's structurally preventing one unanimous version of this is not technical capability, but geopolitical and commercial competition. The United States, China, and the European Union are each pursuing independent AI development with different regulatory philosophies, different access restrictions, and explicit strategic competition rather than collaboration, because whoever controls the most capable AI systems gains substantial economic and military advantage. Private companies within each region are similarly competing rather than pooling their models and training data into a single shared system, because the commercial value of a leading AI system is enormous and exclusive. Building one unified global system would require an unprecedented level of international cooperation on a technology that every major power currently treats as a strategic asset rather than a shared commons, closer to how nuclear technology is handled than how, say, scientific research publication norms work. The technology to build something like this isn't the limiting factor. Human cooperation, or the lack of it, is, which is, in a way, the same limiting factor on most of humanity's hardest problems. Story 14. Going back in time to witness history without changing it, the wish that's actually about watching, not time travel. This wish, described through the lens of Assassin's Creed's Animus device, observing history exactly as it happened without any risk of altering the timeline, is interesting because it's not really asking for time travel in the conventional physics sense. It's asking for a perfect historical observation system, which turns out to be a meaningfully different and arguably more achievable goal. Conventional time travel into the past, as far as physics currently understands it, faces the kind of paradox problems this wish specifically wants to avoid. If you could go back and interact with the past, you could, in principle, change it, creating exactly the causality violations the wish is trying to sidestep by imagining pure observation without interaction. Theoretical physics has explored closed time-like curves permitted under certain solutions to Einstein's field equations, but these remain mathematical curiosities without any known mechanism for practical construction, and they don't resolve the fundamental paradox concerns, even theoretically. What's actually achievable, and arguably scratches a similar itch, is the increasingly sophisticated reconstruction of historical environments and events using accumulating physical evidence, ground-penetrating radar and LiDAR mapping recreating ancient cities in extraordinary detail, AI-assisted translation and reconstruction of damaged or fragmentary ancient texts at a pace and accuracy that's recovering knowledge of the ancient world faster than at any point in history, an increasingly detailed forensic and genetic analysis of historical remains, revealing how people actually lived, what they ate, what diseases they suffered from, and how they died. A perfect, risk-free window into the past in the literal animus sense remains solidly in the category of science fiction, with no known physical mechanism. But the gap between knowing almost nothing concrete about most of history and reconstructing it with startling fidelity from physical and textual evidence is closing faster than most people realize, even without inventing time travel. Story 15. Warp drives, the wish with real mathematics behind it, and an energy problem the size of a universe-wanting warp drive within your lifetime, is, refreshingly, not pure fantasy. It's a wish with genuine, peer-reviewed, theoretical physics behind it, which is more than most entries on a wish list like this can claim. Physicist Miguel Alcubierre published a solution to Einstein's field equations in 1994, describing a method of faster-than-light travel that doesn't actually violate relativity's speed limit, because the ship itself never moves faster than light through local space. Instead, space itself contracts in front of the ship and expands behind it, allowing the ship to effectively surf a wave of distorted spacetime across distances that would otherwise take far longer to traverse. NASA's EagleWorks laboratory has genuinely worked on refining this concept, exploring whether modified bubble geometries could reduce the energy requirements from the original calculation, which required an amount of exotic negative energy comparable to the mass energy of an entire planet or larger, depending on the specific configuration modeled. The core unsolved problem is twofold. Nobody has confirmed that the negative energy density required actually exists in any usable, controllable form. The closest experimentally verified analog, the Casimir effect, produces negative energy density far too minuscule for any propulsion application. And even with theoretically reduced energy requirements from modified geometries, the numbers involved remain so far beyond any conceivable near-term energy generation capacity that warp drive remains firmly in the mathematically consistent but practically inaccessible category. What makes this wish worth taking somewhat seriously rather than dismissing outright, is that it's not banned by physics, the way, say, perpetual motion is banned by thermodynamics. It's banned by engineering and energy constraints that are extraordinarily severe, but not logically impossible. That's a meaningfully different and more hopeful category of impossible than most science fiction propulsion concepts occupy. Story 16. Fixing climate change, the wish that needs less discovery and more deployment. Climate change is a slightly unusual entry on a wish list of scientific discoveries, because the honest assessment from most climate scientists is that we don't primarily need a new discovery to address it. We largely need to deploy, at far greater speed and scale, technology that already exists and works. Solar and wind power have become the cheapest sources of new electricity generation in most of the world, a genuine technological and economic milestone that occurred faster than most projections from even a decade ago anticipated. Battery storage costs have fallen dramatically, addressing the intermittency problem that critics of renewable energy have long pointed to. Electric vehicles have moved from a niche product to a mainstream automotive category, with genuine market share growth across multiple major economies. What remains genuinely undersolved and would benefit from real scientific breakthrough includes several specific gaps. Grid-scale long-duration energy storage that can handle multi-day or seasonal variation rather than just daily charge-discharge cycles. Direct air carbon capture technology efficient and cheap enough to deploy at the gigaton scale required to meaningfully draw down already. Emitted atmospheric CO2 and decarbonization pathways for genuinely hard-to-electrify sectors like aviation, shipping, and certain industrial processes including cement and steel production, which currently have few viable zero-carbon alternatives at commercial scale. The honest scientific consensus is that the climate problem is now substantially a deployment, financing, and political coordination problem rather than purely a technology gap. We have most of what we need to make enormous progress, and the remaining research gaps, while real and worth pursuing, are not the primary bottleneck holding back faster decarbonization. Wanting climate change fixed within your lifetime is less a wish for a single eureka moment and more a wish for sustained political will applied to tools we've mostly already built. Story 17. Downloading a car, the joke wish that accidentally describes real manufacturing technology. The wish to download a car sounds like it's joking about piracy culture applied absurdly to physical objects, but it actually describes, with surprising accuracy, the trajectory that advanced manufacturing technology is genuinely moving toward, even if we're nowhere close to the literal fifth element scene the phrase usually references. 3D printing, additive manufacturing, to use the more serious industry term, has advanced from producing simple plastic prototypes to printing functional metal components used in actual aerospace and automotive applications. Relativity Space has built and flown rockets with the majority of their components 3D printed. Several automotive companies have explored 3D printed components and even, in limited cases, larger structural elements of vehicle bodies. The download half of the wish, taking a digital design file and converting it directly into a physical object without traditional manufacturing infrastructure, is genuinely how modern 3D printing already works at a small scale, and the trajectory of the technology is unmistakably toward larger objects. More material varieties, including various metals, composites, and even biological materials for medical applications, and faster print speeds. What stands between current technology and literally downloading a complete, functional car is overwhelmingly a matter of scale, speed, and the complexity of the components involved. An engine, a battery pack, sophisticated electronics, and safety-critical structural elements all require manufacturing precision and material properties that remain genuinely difficult to achieve through additive manufacturing alone, even with continued advancement. Multi-material printing capable of producing finished, functional, complex assemblies in one continuous process remains a substantial, unsolved engineering challenge. The joke wish, examined seriously, describes a real and active manufacturing research frontier rather than pure fantasy. We're not downloading complete cars anytime soon, but we're closer to printing meaningful chunks of one than the joke's absurdist framing suggests. Story 18. Confirmed. Communicating alien life. The discovery that would change everything except, probably tomorrow morning, wanting confirmed contact with actual communicating alien life forms, not just microbial biosignatures, but genuine intelligent contact, is the most maximalist version of the extraterrestrial life wish. And it's worth being honest about how the probability landscape actually looks for this specific ambitious version of the wish. The search for biosignatures, chemical evidence of life in exoplanet atmospheres, is genuinely active and advancing, with the James Webb Space Telescope currently capable of analyzing the atmospheric composition of certain exoplanets for gases that would be difficult to explain through purely geological processes. This is realistically achievable within a reasonable time frame and would itself be one of the most significant discoveries in scientific history. Confirmed intelligent, communicating life is an entirely different and dramatically less probable proposition on any near-term timescale. The SETI Institute and related projects have been searching for artificial radio or optical signals from other civilizations for over 6 decades without a confirmed detection, the famous WOW. The signal from 1977 remains unexplained but has never been repeated or confirmed as artificial. The Fermi paradox, the tension between the statistical likelihood of intelligent life existing somewhere in a galaxy containing hundreds of billions of stars, and the total absence of confirmed contact or detected signals, remains genuinely unresolved, with explanations ranging from intelligent life being extraordinarily rare, to civilizations not surviving long enough to make contact, to more unsettling possibilities about why advanced civilizations might choose not to broadcast their presence. The honest assessment is that confirmed microbial or biosignature evidence of extraterrestrial life is a plausible, achievable, near-term discovery. Confirmed communicating intelligent contact remains, based on everything we currently understand about the difficulty and rarity of the relevant conditions, considerably less likely within any single human lifetime. Though if it happened, nothing on this entire list would come close to its significance. Story 19. A space elevator, the wish that's mostly blocked by one stubborn materials science problem: a space elevator, a fixed cable extending from Earth's surface to geostationary orbit, allowing cargo and eventually people to be lifted into space mechanically rather than through expensive, fuel-intensive rocket launches, has been a serious engineering concept since at least the 1960s, and the basic physics involved is sound and well understood. The challenge has always been reduced to one specific, stubborn materials science problem: finding a cable material with sufficient tensile strength to weight ratio to support its own weight across the tens of thousands of kilometers required, while remaining light enough to be practically manufacturable and deployable at that scale. Carbon nanotubes have long been the most promising candidate material, since their theoretical tensile strength is dramatically higher than steel at a fraction of the weight, and individual nanotube fibers tested in laboratory conditions have demonstrated strength properties that, in principle, would satisfy the space elevator's structural requirements. The unsolved engineering problem is manufacturing carbon nanotubes at the macroscopic length and consistent quality required for a structure spanning tens of thousands of kilometers. Current manufacturing processes can produce nanotubes of impressive strength only at relatively short lengths, and scaling that strength and consistency up to anything approaching the required cable length remains an active, unsolved materials engineering challenge rather than a solved problem awaiting deployment. Japan's Obayashi Corporation has previously stated ambitions towards space elevator construction within a multi-decade time frame, contingent specifically on carbon nanotube manufacturing reaching the necessary scale, which gives a sense of how seriously some engineering organizations take the concept's eventual feasibility. If the cable material problem gets solved, a space elevator would fundamentally restructure the economics of reaching orbit potentially reducing launch costs by orders of magnitude compared to even reusable rockets. It's a wish blocked by essentially one well-defined material science problem rather than a fundamental physics barrier, which makes it feel tantalizingly close, even though that one problem has resisted solution for 60 years. Story 20. Clean, renewable, essentially free energy. The wish that several different technologies are independently racing toward this wish is interesting, because it's not really asking for one single discovery. It's asking for an outcome that multiple independent technological paths are simultaneously racing toward, any one of which could plausibly deliver something close to essentially free, clean energy within a single human lifetime. Solar power has already achieved a version of this trajectory that would have seemed implausible 20 years ago. The cost of solar electricity generation has fallen by roughly 90% over the past decade and continues to decline, driven by manufacturing scale, efficiency improvements, and material innovations, including perovskite solar cells that promise even cheaper production methods than current silicon-based panels. Combined with continued battery storage cost reductions, solar plus storage is approaching genuine round-the-clock reliability at costs that are competitive with, and in many markets now cheaper than, fossil fuel generation. Fusion power, discussed elsewhere on this list, represents an entirely different technological path toward the same destination. Virtually limitless fuel from seawater, extracted deuterium. No carbon emissions. No long-lived radioactive waste comparable to fission reactors, and energy density far exceeding any chemical fuel source. Advanced geothermal, using deep drilling techniques borrowed from the oil and gas industry to access the Earth's interior heat at locations beyond the traditionally limited volcanic regions where geothermal has historically been viable, represents a third independent path, potentially providing reliable baseload power without the intermittency challenges that solar and wind face. Essentially free probably overstates what any of these technologies will achieve, since infrastructure, maintenance, and distribution costs don't disappear even when the fuel itself is free, or nearly so. But the trajectory across multiple independent technologies, all pointing toward dramatically cheaper, cleaner energy within a single lifetime, is genuinely one of the more achievable wishes on this entire list, precisely because there isn't just one path to the goal. Story 21. Nanorobot disease eradication, the wish that's real research, just at a much smaller scale than the sci-fi version, the vision of microscopic nanorobots patrolling your bloodstream, identifying and destroying disease at the cellular level before it can take hold, is one of the most enduring images in medical science fiction. And the genuinely surprising thing is that a real, if much more modest, version of this concept is already moving from theory into actual clinical research. Nanomedicine as an active research field involves engineering particles at the nanometer scale, far smaller than current microscopic robots in the literal sense, more accurately described as sophisticated drug delivery and targeting systems, designed to navigate the bloodstream and deliver therapeutic payloads with much greater precision than conventional systemic drug administration allows. Lipid nanoparticles, the delivery mechanism that made mRNA vaccines possible, represent an early but genuinely transformative example. They protect fragile genetic material long enough to reach target cells and deliver it directly into the cellular machinery. More advanced experimental nanoparticle systems are being designed with targeting molecules on their surface that bind specifically to markers found on cancer cells but not healthy ones, allowing chemotherapy payloads to be delivered with dramatically reduced collateral damage to surrounding healthy tissue compared to conventional systemic chemotherapy. DNA origami, folding DNA strands into precise three-dimensional nanoscale structures, has been used experimentally to create nanoscale devices capable of responding to specific biological triggers and releasing their payload only under the right cellular conditions. True autonomous nanorobots, in the sense of self-propelled, sensor-equipped machines actively hunting and destroying pathogens with onboard decision-making, remain firmly in the speculative category, Current nanomedicine relies on passive targeting and triggered release rather than anything resembling autonomous robotic behavior at that scale. But the gap between current nanoparticle drug delivery and the eventual goal of comprehensive, precisely targeted disease eradication is a gap of engineering refinement rather than fundamental impossibility, which makes this wish more grounded than its science fiction framing initially suggests. Story 22. Faster than light travel. The wish physics says no to repeatedly, in several different ways. Faster than light travel is one of the most consistently, thoroughly forbidden wishes on this entire list, according to current physics. And it's worth understanding specifically why. Because the prohibition comes from multiple independent directions, rather than a single soft barrier that might eventually be worked around. Einstein's special relativity establishes that as any object with mass approaches the speed of light, the energy required to continue accelerating it increases without bound, approaching infinity as the object's velocity approaches light speed, meaning reaching, let alone exceeding. Light speed would require infinite energy, which is not a practical engineering challenge, but a mathematical impossibility within the framework. Special relativity also predicts that faster than light travel would, under most formulations, permit sending information into the past relative to certain observers, creating causality violations, effects preceding their causes, that the framework treats as fundamentally inconsistent rather than merely difficult. This is part of why the warp drive concept discussed elsewhere on this list is specifically designed to work around rather than violate this prohibition. The Alcubierre metric doesn't have the ship itself moving faster than light through local space. It has space itself being manipulated, which is a meaningfully different proposition under general relativity, even though the practical effect resembles faster than light travel from an outside observer's perspective. Quantum entanglement is sometimes misunderstood as offering a loophole, since correlated measurements between entangled particles do happen instantaneously, regardless of distance. But no usable information can actually be transmitted faster than light using entanglement alone, a result physicists call the no communication theorem, which has been confirmed rigorously and repeatedly. The honest scientific position is that faster than light travel, in the literal sense, remains forbidden by multiple independent, well-tested physical principles rather than merely unachieved with current technology. If it ever becomes possible, it will require physics. We don't currently have any experimental hints that actually exist. Story 23. Cold fusion. The wish that died publicly and kept living privately. Wanting cold fusion within your lifetime means wanting something that became a punchline in 1989 and has, somewhat quietly, refused to entirely disappear from serious scientific consideration since then, even though the original announcement that made it famous collapsed under failed replication almost immediately. Stanley Pons and Martin Fleischmann's 1989 announcement of room temperature nuclear fusion using a simple palladium electrode setup in heavy water generated enormous excitement, followed by an almost equally rapid and thorough scientific repudiation, as laboratories worldwide failed to reliably reproduce the claimed excess heat and nuclear byproducts. The episode became a textbook case study in the dangers of announcing extraordinary scientific claims via press conference rather than peer review. What's less commonly known is that research into the underlying phenomenon, anomalous heat generation in metal hydrogen systems under specific electrochemical conditions, never fully stopped. It rebranded as low-energy nuclear reactions, or LENR, and has continued in a smaller, more cautious research community, including some periodic non-dismissive review by the Department of Energy, and quiet exploratory interest from NASA's Glenn Research Center, and various aerospace and energy companies that have filed patents in adjacent technical areas without major public announcement. The scientific mainstream remains genuinely skeptical, and rightly so. No LENR researcher has yet produced a reliably reproducible demonstration that satisfies the standard of evidence required to overturn the original 1989 failure to replicate. but the persistence of serious researchers continuing to investigate anomalous heat effects, more than 3 decades after the concept was publicly humiliated, suggests the original experiments may have captured something real, but poorly understood and poorly controlled, rather than nothing at all. Wanting cold fusion solved within your lifetime means wanting a quiet, patient research field to finally get the reproducible result that's eluded it for 35 years. Story 24. Conquering hair loss. The wish that's more achievable than it sounds and genuinely underfunded, suggesting that the greatest minds and resources should focus on hair loss reads as a joke, and it's framed as one. But the actual underlying biology and research landscape is more genuinely tractable and more seriously underfunded relative to its market size than most people realize. Male and female pattern hair loss, androgenetic alopecia, is driven by the sensitivity of specific hair follicles to dihydrotestosterone, a testosterone byproduct that progressively miniaturizes affected follicles over time until they stop producing visible hair. The follicles, importantly, typically don't die entirely. They remain present in a dormant, miniaturized state, which is exactly why existing treatments like minoxidil and finasteride can sometimes partially reverse early-stage hair loss by addressing the follicle's dormant state, rather than needing to create something from nothing. The research generating genuine excitement involves hair follicle regeneration from stem cells, with teams at Japan's Riken Institute and Kyoto University developing techniques to culture hair follicle organoids, 3-dimensional structures recreating the complex cellular architecture required for healthy follicle function that can potentially be implanted into the scalp to establish new, functioning follicles, rather than relying solely on rescuing existing miniaturized ones. Early animal model results have been promising, though achieving the precise cellular organization required for normal hair production and color through this method remains a genuine, ongoing technical challenge. The commercial case for taking this more seriously than the joke framing suggests is substantial. Pattern hair loss affects roughly half of men by their 50s and a meaningful proportion of women, representing one of the largest unmet medical and cosmetic markets in existence, with existing treatments providing only partial and often temporary benefit for most users. A genuine, reliable cure would represent an enormous quality of life improvement for an enormous number of people. Modest in stakes compared to curing cancer, certainly, but far more achievable on a near-term timeline, and arguably underfunded relative to how many people it would actually help. Story 25. A grand unified theory of everything. The wish that would finally let physics stop arguing with itself, wanting a grand unified theory, or more ambitiously, a theory of everything, within your lifetime, means wanting physics to resolve one of its deepest and most persistent embarrassments: the fact that our 2 most successful and rigorously tested theoretical frameworks, general relativity and quantum mechanics, describe the universe with extraordinary precision within their respective domains, while remaining fundamentally mathematically incompatible with each other at the points where both should apply simultaneously, such as inside black holes or at the moment of the Big Bang. General relativity describes gravity beautifully as the curvature of space-time caused by mass and energy, and has been confirmed through tests ranging from the bending of starlight around the sun to the direct detection of gravitational waves from colliding black holes. Quantum mechanics describes the behavior of particles and forces at the smallest scales with equally extraordinary precision, confirmed through countless experiments, including the eventual discovery of the Higgs boson in 2012, which completed the Standard Model's prediction of particle physics as currently understood. The problem is that when physicists try to apply quantum principles to gravity itself, the mathematics breaks down, producing nonsensical, infinite results rather than coherent predictions. String theory and loop quantum gravity represent the 2 most developed candidate frameworks attempting to resolve this incompatibility, each proposing radically different underlying pictures of reality, extra spatial dimensions, and vibrating fundamental strings in one case, a discrete, granular structure of spacetime itself in the other. but neither has produced a testable, falsifiable prediction that distinguishes it experimentally from its rival or confirms it over the existing separate frameworks. A genuine unification would represent the completion of a project Einstein himself spent his final decades unsuccessfully pursuing. Whether it arrives through string theory, loop quantum gravity, or some currently unimagined third framework, it would mark one of the most significant intellectual achievements in the history of science, finally explaining gravity and quantum mechanics as two faces of one coherent underlying reality. Story 26. Anti-gravity revisited. The wish that keeps showing up because it keeps not quite closing anti-gravity appears more than once on lists like this one, which says something about how persistently appealing and persistently unresolved the question remains. Unlike faster than light travel, which is forbidden by multiple independent, rigorously tested physical principles, anti-gravity occupies a genuinely murkier position, not supported by any confirmed mechanism within general relativity, but not explicitly, definitively ruled out by any single ironclad law in the way thermodynamics rules out perpetual motion. The theoretical opening, such as it is, involves the possibility of negative mass or exotic matter possessing negative energy density, which the equations of general relativity suggest would produce genuinely repulsive rather than attractive gravitational effects. The Casimir effect, two closely spaced parallel conducting plates experiencing an attractive force due to quantum vacuum fluctuations between them, demonstrates that negative energy density is at least physically real and experimentally confirmed in a specific, narrow context, even though the magnitude involved is far too small for any conceivable propulsion or levitation application. Various fringe and semi-fringe research efforts over the decades, including some genuinely conducted by credentialed researchers at legitimate institutions, have investigated whether electromagnetic fields, superconductors, or rotating masses might produce measurable gravitational anomalies under specific conditions. The most famous of these, the Podkletnov gravity shielding claims from the 1990s involving a rotating superconducting disk, generated significant attention and some preliminary NASA interest before failing rigorous independent replication. The honest current scientific position is that no confirmed anti-gravity mechanism exists, and most physicists consider the prospect highly unlikely given how thoroughly tested and successful general relativity has been at predicting gravitational behavior without requiring any such mechanism. But the absence of a hard, mathematically airtight prohibition, the kind that closes the door on faster than light travel, keeps a thin, persistent sliver of genuine scientific curiosity alive, rather than relegating it entirely to pure fantasy. Story 27. Deep space colonization and tourism. The wish that splits into two very different timelines. This wish actually contains two genuinely distinct goals with very different feasibility timelines, and it's worth separating them rather than treating deep space colonization and tourism as a single, achievable package. Space tourism in low Earth orbit and even lunar-adjacent space is already, quietly, a real and growing commercial reality. Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin have flown paying customers on suborbital flights. Private astronaut missions have flown complete commercial crews to the International Space Station. Several companies have announced plans for dedicated commercial space stations intended partly for tourism once the ISS is eventually retired. This category of the wish isn't speculative. It's an emerging industry with a visible, near-term growth trajectory, even if it remains accessible only to the very wealthy for the foreseeable future. Deep space colonization, genuine, self-sustaining human settlement beyond cislunar space, most plausibly on Mars given current technology, is an entirely different order of challenge. SpaceX's Starship program is explicitly designed with Mars colonization as a stated long-term goal, aiming for the kind of full reusability and launch cost reduction that would make transporting the enormous quantities of cargo and people required for genuine self-sufficiency economically conceivable rather than merely scientifically interesting. But the unsolved problems are substantial and numerous, radiation exposure during the months-long transit and on the Martian surface itself, which lacks Earth's protective magnetosphere. The physiological effects of prolonged reduced gravity on human bone density, muscle mass, and other body systems. Psychological resilience for crews in extended isolation, and the genuine technical challenge of producing food, breathable air, and usable water reliably from local Martian resources rather than continuous resupply from Earth. Tourism in near-Earth space within your lifetime is increasingly realistic. Genuine deep space colonization, while actively being pursued with real funding and real hardware, remains a multi-decade project even under optimistic projections. Story 28. The Singularity Revisited. Why this wish keeps reappearing on every list. The technological singularity shows up more than once among these wishes, and that repetition is itself informative. It suggests this particular concept occupies a unique psychological position as the wish that would, if achieved, potentially fulfill every other wish on the list simultaneously, by accelerating the rate of scientific and technological progress beyond what unaided human researchers could achieve within comparable timeframes. The mechanism remains the same, regardless of how many times the wish appears. An artificial intelligence system capable of conducting genuine AI research could, in principle, design improvements to its own architecture, producing a marginally more capable successor system, which could then design further improvements faster and more effectively than the previous version managed, creating a feedback loop whose growth trajectory becomes difficult to predict using ordinary human intuitions about the pace of technological change. What's worth adding to this second appearance of the concept is the genuine, serious disagreement among AI researchers themselves about how close current systems actually are to this threshold. Large language models have repeatedly demonstrated capability jumps as they scale that researchers did not explicitly program for and did not always fully anticipate in advance, which has shifted many credible estimates of relevant timelines meaningfully closer than they were even 5 years ago. Other researchers remain genuinely skeptical that current architectures, however impressive, represent a path toward the kind of genuinely recursive self-improvement the singularity concept requires, arguing that scaling existing approaches may hit diminishing returns or fundamental architectural limits before reaching that threshold. The recurring nature of this wish across multiple independent contributors to a list like this one reflects something real. It's the single concept that functions as a kind of master key, promising to solve hair loss, cancer, climate change, and faster-than-light travel all at once, by outsourcing the remaining hard work of scientific discovery to something smarter and faster than we are. Whether that's a genuinely achievable near-term goal or a beautiful, dangerous oversimplification, remains one of the most consequential open questions in technology today. Story 29. Hoverboards. The wish that's real tech with a permanently disappointing range problem wanting actual. Back to the Future style hoverboards within your lifetime is a wonderfully specific and refreshingly modest wish compared to most of this list. And the genuinely surprising thing is that working hoverboards, using real physics, not movie magic, already exist, just with limitations that have kept them firmly in the novelty category rather than the practical transportation category. The Lexus Slide and the Hendo hoverboard, both developed and publicly demonstrated in the 2010s, use a combination of permanent magnets and induction technology, generating magnetic fields that interact with a specially prepared conductive surface, typically copper or a similar conductive metal embedded beneath the riding surface, to produce genuine, demonstrated levitation, with riders shown gliding above the ground with no wheels or direct contact whatsoever. The catch, and it's a substantial one, is that this approach to magnetic levitation only works above a specifically prepared conductive surface, not on ordinary pavement, grass, or any of the surfaces a practical, general-purpose hoverboard would need to function on for everyday transportation use the way skateboards or bicycles do. This is the same fundamental limitation that affects maglev trains, which require dedicated, specially constructed magnetic track infrastructure. Rather than operating on ordinary roads or existing rail lines, the levitation works, but only in a carefully prepared environment built specifically to support it. Solving the works anywhere problem would require either a dramatically different levitation mechanism, not dependent on a specially prepared surface, or a comprehensive infrastructure build-out retrofitting streets and pavements with embedded conductive material, which presents an enormous practical and financial barrier separate from the underlying physics. The physics of magnetic levitation hoverboards is solved and demonstrated. The infrastructure and surface independence problem is what's actually standing between current prototypes and the genuinely freewheeling hoverboard the Wish is picturing. Story 30. The Death of Aging, the brave new world wish that's more carefully researched than the reference implies. This wish, wanting to stop biological aging around the peak physical condition of early adulthood, living out a full lifespan in that state until eventual death in your 60s to 80s, rather than experiencing decades of progressive physical decline, is a genuinely more nuanced and specific request than simple immortality, and it maps closely onto what serious longevity researchers actually mean when they talk about health span rather than lifespan extension. The distinction matters enormously in the actual research community. Extending lifespan without addressing the underlying biological aging process simply means living longer in a progressively deteriorating body, which very few people, when asked directly, actually want. The genuinely compelling goal driving most credible longevity science isn't living to 150 in a frail, declining state. It's compressing morbidity, meaning maintaining youthful physical and cognitive function for as much of your life as possible, with decline happening rapidly and briefly near the natural end of life, rather than gradually over decades, the way the Brave New World reference in this wish specifically envisions. The biological research supporting this goal involves the hallmarks of aging framework discussed elsewhere. Senolytics clearing damaged cells that drive chronic inflammation, partial cellular reprogramming research showing genuine promise for reversing certain age-related cellular markers in animal models, and metabolic interventions, including drugs originally developed for diabetes that have shown broader effects on aging-related biomarkers in ongoing human trials, achieving genuinely sustained youthful function through your 60s, 70s, or 80s, followed by a relatively rapid decline rather than decades of gradual deterioration, is arguably one of the more realistic and specific versions of the broader longevity wish on this list. Not because it's easy, but because it's a more precisely defined, more medically tractable target than vague immortality, and it's the explicit goal that a meaningful portion of current, well-funded longevity research is actually organized around achieving. Story 31. A cure for multiple sclerosis and genetically enhanced helper monkeys, which already sort of exist. Multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune condition in which the immune system attacks myelin, the protective sheath surrounding nerve fibers, disrupting the electrical signals nerves use to communicate and producing a wide and often unpredictable range of neurological symptoms depending on which areas of the brain and spinal cord are affected. Treatment has improved substantially over recent decades. Disease-modifying therapies can significantly slow progression and reduce relapse frequency for many patients, but a genuine cure, meaning the prevention or reversal of the underlying immune dysfunction and associated nerve damage, remains elusive. Research progress has been genuinely encouraging on a few fronts. Epstein-Barr virus has emerged as a strong suspected trigger for MS in research over the past several years, with a major Harvard-led study finding that MS risk increased dramatically following EV infection, raising the possibility that an effective EV vaccine could meaningfully prevent MS in people who haven't yet developed it. Remyelination research, exploring how to encourage the body's own oligodendrocyte cells to regenerate damaged myelin sheaths rather than just slowing further immune-driven damage, represents a genuinely different, regeneration-focused approach beyond simply suppressing the immune response. The genetically enhanced helper monkeys addition is delivered as a joke. complete with the acknowledgement that it sounds like the setup to a problem. But it's worth noting that trained capuchin monkeys already assist people with severe physical disabilities, including quadriplegia, performing tasks like retrieving objects, opening containers, and operating switches. A real, if modest and non-genetically modified, existing assistance animal program. The genetic enhancement leap specifically, engineering monkeys with greater cognitive or physical capability for assistance purposes, would raise exactly the kind of ethical questions the joke is gesturing toward, well beyond the relatively contained ethical territory of training already intelligent animals to perform specific helpful tasks. Story 32. Replicators. The Star Trek wish that 3D printing is slowly, imperfectly approaching wanting genuine Star Trek-style replicators, devices capable of converting raw energy or basic matter directly into any complex object, including fully prepared meals, on demand, is one of the more explicitly science fiction wishes on this list. And it's worth being honest about just how far current technology actually sits from that vision, even while acknowledging real, relevant progress happening in adjacent fields. The replicator concept, as depicted in Star Trek, essentially requires either matter-to-energy to matter conversion at the molecular or even atomic level, or an extraordinarily sophisticated, near-instantaneous form of multi-material assembly capable of producing genuinely complex finished objects, including the precise molecular composition and texture of prepared food, from undifferentiated base material. Neither capability exists in any form remotely close to this today, and the energy requirements for genuine matter-energy conversion at any practical scale would be staggering, given how E/MC describes the relationship between mass and energy. Converting even small amounts of matter into and out of energy form requires energies comparable to nuclear reactions. What does exist and is advancing rapidly is 3D printing technology that's increasingly capable of producing complex objects from digital designs using various base materials, including some genuinely surprising food-related applications. Researchers have demonstrated 3D printed food items using various edible pastes and powders as feedstock, and some specialized culinary and even medical nutrition applications already use this technology in limited contexts. The honest gap between current 3D printing technology and a genuine Star Trek replicator is enormous, spanning fundamental physics limitations around matter-energy conversion, as well as practical engineering challenges around multi-material, molecular-level precision assembly. This wish, more than most others on this list, sits closer to the delightful science fiction end of the spectrum than the achievable within a lifetime end, regardless of how charmingly the Stargate reference frames the motivation for wanting it. Story 33. Teleportation. The wish quantum physics has already partially, confusingly delivered. Teleportation sounds like pure science fiction, and the version most people picture, instantly transporting a person's entire physical body across distance, remains exactly that. But quantum teleportation is a real, experimentally confirmed phenomenon, and understanding the gap between what it actually does and what the wish is picturing is genuinely illuminating. Quantum teleportation, first experimentally demonstrated in the late 1990s and since extended to increasingly impressive distances, including satellite-based demonstrations, involves using quantum entanglement to transfer the precise quantum state of one particle to another distant particle without the original particle physically traveling between the two locations. Crucially, this process necessarily destroys the original particle's state in the process of transferring it. It's not duplication, and it's not the original object actually moving through space. It's the transfer of quantum information using entanglement as the channel. This matters enormously for understanding why teleporting a person remains entirely speculative rather than an engineering problem awaiting solution. A human body contains an almost incomprehensibly vast number of atoms in an extraordinarily complex arrangement, and quantum teleportation as currently demonstrated works with individual particles, or in more advanced recent experiments, small numbers of entangled particles, scaling this to the complete molecular structure of a human body. while also resolving the requirement that the original would need to be destroyed in the process exactly as quantum teleportation requires for individual particles, represents a problem that isn't simply more of the same technology, bigger, but potentially a fundamentally different and vastly more complex undertaking that current physics offers no clear pathway toward. Quantum teleportation has genuine, important practical applications already emerging in quantum computing and quantum communication networks, where transferring quantum information between processing nodes is exactly what's needed. Teleporting yourself to the beach, however, remains firmly in the realm of wishful imagination rather than active engineering pursuit.